Hi, I'm Ruzive, Ecosystem and Partnerships Associate at Beyond Form. Welcome to this podcast episode from Venturing into Fashion Tech. We love to bring guests to you to encourage you on your journey as a founder. And one of the questions we often hear is, how do I fundraise for my fashion tech startup? If this is you, we have an exciting guest joining us today, Bethany Greer, a venture partner at Bethany Greer Ventures with a passion to invest into impactful fashion startups. After various roles within the fashion media and design sectors, she saw the unfortunate environmental and social realities of the industry and why investing into the right tech startups can help turn things around in fashion. As we all know, it's not easy to fundraise or even to know how to identify when you have found the right investors. So this episode aims to provide insights into what investors are looking for and what you should also look out for.
Your time is so precious that you could spend 3 months fundraising and pitching to all the wrong investors if you're not careful. So really hone in on what do I want from an investor.
Early stage tech for good fund companies like New and Birdsong are amongst those that Bethany has helped to push forward in her current role. We have also recently seen millions of dollars and pounds invested in fashion tech startups that focus on digital fashion platforms, NFTs, blockchain, and more. We hope you enjoy hearing more about this topic in this episode.
You ready, Bethany?
Yes, ready.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for taking time to speak to myself and Von today about investments in fashion tech. I just want to start off with asking you to kind of introduce yourself to our audience.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. So I started in fashion in New York. Mostly was my first actual real job in design. And I just sort of interned there in between university. Originally that's what I thought I wanted, but I think if you spend any real time in the design process, you see sort of the downfalls of the industry in terms of sustainability and ethics. And at that time, I guess I started in 2017. And so there was a lot of talk about action around sustainability, but not really much follow through. So I started having a look around what else I could do, and I spent a bit of time in nonprofit, but again, it just felt like a lot of talk, very little action. So when I moved to London, I took a job at basically it was an EU-funded project that supported fashion tech ventures and helping them get funding, helping them get their business off the ground, work with designers, that sort of thing. So I worked there and helped those startups and really kind of got a view on venture capital and what it meant to be an investor in early stage startups, and decided that I wanted to do that. So I kind of switched over and started working at Bethany Greer Ventures, which is an impact early stage fund investing in what they called tech for good ventures. So really anything that at its maximum scale could positively impact the lives of millions. But of course, being a venture capital fund, also commercially would be worth upwards of 100 million, 200 million, etc. So very large, for-profit companies. So I worked there for the last 3 and a bit years and just recently moved to venture partnering. So yeah, that's a bit about...
So you essentially have your eyes and ears on the ground when it comes to investments, and specifically impact on fashion and innovation.
Yes, definitely impact, yes.
So I look forward to digging deeper into that in a second. But I'm just going to recap some of the investments announcements that have happened literally just over the last month, in the month of June. So Lingtex Digital from China, also known as Style 3D, raised $100 million to accelerate their digital fashion platform. So that's a big, massive fundraise. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of that happening in NFTs, blockchains, digital fashion. Quite a few raises this year being announced. On the smaller scale, StyleScan, coming from LA, raised a further $1 million, totaling their pre-Series A to $3 million. Which I think is interesting. There's a lot around happening in AI and fashion, and specifically virtual fit as well. And then more in line with the things that you're doing. So Modern Synthesis raised $4.1 million in seed funding, which I want to dig a little bit deeper later on, and also Nextiles as well from New York, which just raised $5 million, and more specifically for their wearables platform, which I think is quite exciting because we haven't really seen that much happening in wearables. So it's interesting to see how they've raised $5 million. So quite a few announcements in June. I wanted to start off with, okay, we're seeing quite big raises being announced. We're in a market crash, so how is this still happening, basically?
Well, one thing I would say, just in terms of the market changing, is yes, of course, we're seeing investors tighten up a little bit more around valuation, around, just investments in general. But I would add, if we think about the last 12, 16 months, how many funds announced themselves, right? How many new funds began. They have to deploy that money, and generally within a 3-4 year time period into initial investments. So I think there is absolutely still money, but one, I think, potential upside actually of the market tightening is forcing investors to really narrow in on, versus going after hype or what others are doing, is really narrowing in on what they think is changing in the market, what they truly believe in, and taking a little bit more of a powered stance around their investments. I guess that's particularly if we're talking about even, NFTs and that sort of thing. Specifically, I think that's been an area where the last 8 or 9 months there's been a lot of money thrown at things. So potentially that's the nature of an up and coming area. But at the same time, I think this market tightening is going to force investors to really consider what they think the future is going to be in that space.
And how do you think it might affect fashion tech specifically?
So fashion tech has had its challenges, I would say. A lot of investors have, I guess in my experience, at earlier stage, so we'll say anything before Series B is more what I have experience in. So it's always had a bad rap, definitely around wearables, fit tech, all that kind of stuff. I think just generally a lot of investors kind of wave it off as not big enough market or just not exciting enough and things like that. So for fashion tech specifically, I think there's going to be certain areas like fit and also advanced materials. Those need really big funding rounds. They need investors who are going to be patient because those generally have a longer time frame than typical VC time scales expectations. So I think just like any other sort of market that has already had its challenges in breaking through, I think even more so ones who are like investors, I would say, who are native or understand the market better, are going to have to take more of a lead and bring investors into rounds and really kind of steer where the investments go versus more generalist investors coming in and taking a stand.
Okay, so let's switch to the startup side then. So should these startups do to ride out this little wave of crisis?
Again, I'm not an expert on where the market's going. We'll have to see how that plays out. But from what founders can do, we did reach a point, certainly in the US and the UK, it was heading that way, but certainly in North America, valuations were, just pretty insane, and the speed at which teams were raising money was pretty high, and I think that what founders can do, but also are going to have to do, is do a little bit more with a little bit less in terms of proving out their concept and getting to a place before they go out and raise a major round where they have some evidence of scalability and also some evidence of commercial traction, and then anything that is more science-based, so requires like a lab and that sort of thing. I think we're also going to need to see more accelerators like yourselves and academics kind of step up and put in a bit more money at the very early stages. But yeah, for founders, it's just that's terrible advice. Like, do more, but do more and don't raise money. It's not really advice. It's honestly what I think is gonna have to happen. Like, it's gonna be a little bit riskier. That's just the reality. But also, there's gonna be so many teams who fundraised in the last 12 months that are gonna crash because actually they were raising money that they didn't know what they needed to spend it on. They're gonna maybe have to raise at a down valuation, things like that. So it's, being smart about where you're getting your money from, how much you're raising, etc. That is part of the founder's job. It's not just raising as much as possible kind of thing.
So takeaway is timing of that fundraise and then penny pinching if you do fundraise, basically, to extend the runway as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think like maybe in terms of like actual advice, like really lean on your fellow founders. Like if you don't have a network or even just one other founder who is maybe like one round ahead of you or very close in line to where you're at, maybe just a little bit ahead, like lean on those those fellow founders, because they're going to give you way more empathy, probably advice than, probably your investors or incoming investors. Like they're seeing it happen in real time. So like build a network if you can of people around you to support you who are, not a founder from 10 years ago. Like those are helpful, of course, but if you don't have someone who is close in line to the stage that you're at, then I think you're just missing out on like that level of support.
Makes sense. Shall we move on to then what's exciting us in terms of innovations?
Yeah.
And if you had a gazillion euros to spend, who'd spend it on, basically?
Who would I spend it on? Well, I also want to hear some of yours too. But like my personal passion, I think, is in the material space. I really love anything looking at how can we dye things better? How can we innovate in the material space? That area has just gotten... There's so many teams who reach a certain stage and then just can't break through. Normally it happens like just as they're raising Series A, maybe. Of course there are some standouts that have made it through. But in general, that's a very tough space to break in. And I think at the same time, it's also one of the spaces that truly, if we were talking about sustainability, can actually have a generational impact. And that's what excites me, is when I look at something and I think about how the next generation would benefit from whatever that company is doing. And also if I can picture what their imprint could be on the industry in 10 years, like would the material that they're creating become something as, that you would see in 50% of design studios or something. Like it would be like the equivalent to cotton, etc. Like things like that, where I can really see them making a huge imprint on the industry. So I love anything in material space. The other thing that I really like is things, I guess this applies to more e-commerce as a whole, but really things that are optimizing logistics from a sustainability perspective. You could put that in the fashion tech category for sure. But it does definitely apply to wider supply chains in general. But I think those areas are my most exciting ones.
So we mentioned right at the start, I mentioned rather, that Modern Synthesis just raised $4.1 million. For those of audience members that don't know who they are, they're actually growing fabrics from microbes. So where do you think this is going to take them next, this seed round?
Well, seed stage for a biomaterial company is so critical, because typically that means I don't know exactly what their contracts look like, but generally you're piloting with a number of designers or larger companies. I think they theirs can apply to things like Nike, Adidas, like, more sportswear as well. And so generally at that stage, you're really proving out concept, proving out that you can work into an existing supply chain, or that whatever you're building is feasible financially. So hopefully this round gets them to a place where they can prove that out, because I think what they're doing is really great. I think it's really exciting. The other thing is, again, I don't know that the background of their science and that sort of thing, but one thing that I'm seeing more biomaterials startups see is them being able to point out to investors what other applications beyond fashion textiles their product can have. So if they're going down a licensing route, for example, how can that apply into the medical industry, the auto industry, things like that. And that creates a much bigger picture for investors to back and say, yes, I can see this turning into $1 billion plus company. Yeah. So I think their application, again, at seed stage, if they can provide some early signs of further applications outside of specific fashion textiles, then that's going to be huge for them.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to be wearing microbes anytime soon? Do you want to wear
Crossing
microbes?
fingers.
I guess one, do you want to wear
exactly.
I'm not really into that. I have seen people kind of, looking into innovation of like growing fabrics in bathtubs and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is quite interesting. But personally, for me, in terms of like what I find interesting in fashion innovation and tech at the moment.
Yeah.
For some reason, it's not actually textiles and fabrics.
Okay.
And I just feel like it is really because of what you've mentioned earlier, that startups usually get to a certain point.
Yeah.
And they kind of hit like a dead end, which is quite unfortunate. But I think that's also because of the tech that's not really there yet to be able to actually move that forward. So usually, like, automatically I would then look more into the visuals. I'm really into the digital side of digital design side of fashion tech. Actually, that's what's exciting me at the moment. I've looked more into NFTs because in the past, maybe some of the past podcasts, I've mentioned, like, I really don't get why people would invest in that. Like, you're just getting digital stuff or assets. But now I still don't think, you'd need to have that. But I get that is kind of where fashion is at the moment. That's where it's going. And visually it is pleasing. So I think that's what excites me in terms of that. But in terms of investment side, I'm not sure why people would invest that much, and apart from the fact that it is a hype at the moment, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to also note, just going back to materials, Recover, who recycles cotton, basically, just announced in June $100 million raise as well, led by Goldman Sachs. So I think when we have big institutions coming into the round, I think that's quite a strong signalling. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. I think what I mentioned before, which is funds who specifically understand the market and who can take a stance and differentiate, for example, between two companies at Series A who are doing the same thing, but they understand that one's tech is superior, things like that. They have a duty to bring in those more institutional investors and guide them through why it's better, what the applications are, that sort of thing. So it really is important for those bigger institutions to be open, I suppose, but it does signal that it signals that the market is ready for change, is, I guess, the most important takeaway from a big institution coming in is, okay, yes, this is the next 10 plus years of innovation is in, for example, recycling cotton, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So shall we move on to some advice then for startups? What do you look for when you're analysing a startup for investment? So at BGV, we would normally be the first investors. So normally we would invest in something basically pre-product. Maybe it would be one or two founders, so super, super early.
And initially, of course, what you're looking for really is in the people. And every early stage investor says that, because it's true.
Yeah, we say the same as well.
There's no, I mean, what else are you going to say? Because there's nothing else to go off of. I guess, apart from the idea, of course, but I think we've yet to invest in something that hasn't somewhat changed over the course of time, right? Like the business model or things like that. Mm-hmm. But I would say one other thing that maybe isn't mentioned as much is we would also look for what kind of community member they would be, like, within the context of the rest of the portfolio. So because we're very early stage investors, we consider that a big chunk of those companies are going to shut down within a year, 2 years. I mean, that's just the way the cookie crumbles if you're investing, if you're a first investor, right? So actually what has happened is a lot of those team members end up joining companies within the portfolio. And so we really consider, like, how open as a community member are they going to be within the portfolio? And I think that signals, like that question, for example, brings up what kind of founder they would be, what kind of manager they would be, because that's the other really, really important, I would say one of the most important things to look for, and to ask yourself if you want to go down the founder route is, do I want to build something or do I want to manage? Like, because the hardest transition, I think, for a lot of founders is going from building and creating the product initially to then taking a much higher level role and overseeing and managing and also fundraising. If you don't like fundraising, then that's a big question you have to ask yourself. If you don't like that element of it, not to say you can't be a founder, but maybe join forces with someone who does want to do that side of things. So we really look for, if it's multi-founders, is one able to do we see them being able to take the lead further on in a more CEO role? So I would say those are like key elements, aside from, that the idea is something that we're excited about. That's obviously bar minimum. But yeah.
What do you think? Well, we've obviously met quite a few founders
along
the way.
I think a lot of the founders do have certain gaps, including financials. So
right.
like
Always see that
all the time.
Yeah.
Like you've mentioned, obviously, about that maybe people can join forces with someone else.
Yeah.
With that, and I think that's really important for founders to know that, because I think a lot of the time it's natural to just want to just take on everything yourself.
Yeah.
And most of the time you probably will do that at the beginning of a startup. But yeah, as it grows, definitely not trying to just kind of have all of that on your back and just trying to fill in those gaps with other people. And I was listening to this other podcast where this lady, completely forgot her name, but she was just saying that she is not afraid of hiring people smarter than her, because obviously they are the ones that are going to help her grow with certain areas as well. So
absolutely,
I think that's definitely advice that I would give for founders as well.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that how you talked about there is a real strategy for the investors about portfolio growing, and I think a lot of founders overlook that element.
Right.
Like, even if they have an amazing idea, if it doesn't fit into the portfolio, they're not going to go for it.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and I think brings up a really, really important point for founders, which is like, do your diligence on investors when you're reaching out, because your time is so precious that you could spend 3 months fundraising and pitching to all the wrong investors if you're not careful. So really, really hone in on, like, what do I want from an investor? And as you said, look at the portfolio creation and really ask yourself, do I see myself fitting in here? Is there something that I'm doing that actually there's I hate that word, but synergy between myself and another company or another couple companies? So important for founders.
Yeah. So then, where do you think everything is heading in the next 6 months? Who do we think is going to be announcing a fundraising round?
So I do think there was a definite boom in the NFT space for a while there, for sure. I think that's definitely going to be pulled back, just given the market and everything, but also given how we're seeing that a lot of these companies don't really know what NFTs mean for them, or they maybe launched something that didn't quite work out in the way that they wanted to. There's obviously lots of buzz around builds community. It reinforces brand loyalty, that sort of thing. I think, unfortunately, a lot of big brands just saw dollar signs, and so it kind of ruined it for a lot of innovation because that took over a lot of the headlines. So I think we'll maybe see more experimentation rather than straight as much investing in that space. And what else will we see? I don't know where it's going to go with a lot of the sort of digital stuff. I haven't paid as much attention to it, so it's interesting that you bring that up. I'm definitely going to go and look at what's going on in there. Yeah.
What do you think in the next 6 months? Who do you think might be announcing a raise, or what do you think we're going to see come next?
It is quite difficult to tell, just because I feel like it's not the end of kind of NFTs and all the digital stuff. Yeah. I think everyone is still trying to get into that. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we do see a little bit more sharpening on that side of things. Yeah. And hopefully the investments can help to produce higher quality of that. Because at the moment we've seen a lot of what we said actually about how everything looks a little bit 2000s in terms of the style, the avatars, everything that is in the metaverse or NFTs and everything related in fashion. Would love to see actually more investment going into building more quality on that front.
Yeah. And I think one other thing there is, like, if we think about like community building tools like Geneva, for example, or things like that obviously apply far beyond fashion. I think the fashion industry is constantly sort of late to the game in figuring out how to navigate their customers and how to balance their designs and what they want to create and just their supply chain in general, and balance that alongside, well, what are our customers actually asking for, and both in terms of design and also quantity wise and things like that. So hopefully we'll also see some innovation in we've had a couple of exciting ones that have done sort of pre-orders and things like that, but I think that we're totally just scratching the surface there. And then one area which I guess we haven't spoken about, but is also still, I think, just scratch the surface, is the resale and that sort of thing. Obviously you have like Depop, who's now exited, so they paved the way for a lot of up and coming platforms. That's not to say that I don't think that there's a ton of noise and ones that, I wouldn't personally invest in because I don't know how they're differentiated, but I do think that there's a lot that's coming up in that bigger brands in-house they're keen, like they want it, like so many are investing in their own ways of managing resale, managing refurbishment, things like that. So I think we'll still see more along those lines too.
On that note, Bethany, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
for speaking with myself and Von today.
Yes, it was so nice. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. We will be releasing episodes at least once a month, with each episode featuring a different topic. We'll also have guests joining us, such as founders from our portfolio of startups and fashion industry insiders from our incredible network, to bring further discussions on sustainability, fresh perspectives on design, and many more, all related to fashion tech. Be sure to check us out on social media at beyondform_io, as well as our website beyondform.io for updates. Beyond Form brings human and financial resources together to launch and scale early-stage fashion tech startups with ambitious founders. We hope to potentially see some of you joining our venture studio very soon. Don't forget to drop us a line if you'd like to hear us talk about a specific topic. Until next time.